Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to tackle a really fundamental question. What is sin? We're going to deconstruct a very precise historical definition to see what it can really show us. So let's dive right in. We're going to start with this quote from theologian John Murray. What he's saying here is that the documents we're about to look at were crafted with an incredible amount of care and precision. So this sets the stage for us. This isn't just a casual chat. We're really analyzing a deeply considered, historically significant definition. So here's our roadmap. We'll start with the source of our definition, the Westminster Standards. Then we'll break down the definition of sin itself, and you'll see it has two really key parts, conformity and transgression. After that, we'll look at the absolute standard it puts forward, and we'll wrap up with a review. And you'll see all the way through we'll have key terms in both English and Chinese.
Okay, first up, the Westminster Standards. To really get a grip on the definition of sin we're exploring, you have to understand where it comes from. And this source has some really deep historical and theological roots. So our definition of sin comes from this larger body of work from the 1600s called the Westminster Standards. These are really foundational documents for Presbyterian theology. And the key thing for us today is that they include something called the Shorter Catechism, which is the direct source for the incredibly precise, almost legalistic definition we're about to unpack.
All right, now for the definition itself. We are zeroing in on just one single question and answer from that Shorter Catechism. Question 14. It's such a simple question, right? But it's also incredibly profound. What is sin? Before I show you the answer, just take a second. How would you define it? It's definitely trickier than it sounds. And here is the answer from the Catechism. Sin, or its way, is any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. Now, I know that sounds a little dense, maybe a bit like legal language, but that precision is exactly the point. It's built on Scripture. And what's really crucial here is that the single sentence actually contains two totally distinct ideas that we need to pull apart. And that brings us right to our next section. See, the definition gives us two ways to fail, by lack of conformity and by transgression. Understanding the difference between these two is really the key to unlocking this whole concept. First up, let's look at want of conformity, or 不遵从. Now, the word want here is a bit old-fashioned. It just means a lack or a deficiency. So this is not about an action you take, it's about your very state of being. It's a failure to measure up on the inside, a failure to be what the law requires you to be. You could call it a sin of omission. Okay, now for the second part, transgression, or 过犯. This is probably the one we're all a lot more familiar with, right? A transgression is an active violation. It's when you cross a line that's been clearly drawn. This is what we usually think of as sin, a sin of commission, where you actively do something the law says not to do. This slide just lays out that core difference perfectly. Want of conformity is internal. It's a state of being. It's about who you are. Transgression is external. It's an action. It's about what you do. And here's the kicker. According to this definition, both are considered sin equally. And this is where it gets really radical. The big implication here is that sin isn't just about the bad things we do. It's also an internal failure to line up with the divine standard. This means a person could avoid all outward bad behavior, look like a morally good person to everyone, and yet still exists in a state of want of conformity. So that brings us to our fourth section. If sin is measured by how we conform or transgress, what's it measured against? Well, the definition is clear, the law of God. And there's one tiny little word in that definition that makes this standard, well, completely absolute. So the law of God here is presented as the one exclusive objective standard. Sin isn't about breaking cultural rules or hurting someone's feelings. It's an objective breach of divine authority. And this standard is incredibly comprehensive. It doesn't just apply to our actions, but to our entire internal world of thoughts, desires, and motivations. And here it is. That powerful little word, any. In Chinese, 任何. Sin is any want of conformity. Just think about that. That single word radically expands the scope of this definition. It leaves absolutely no room for exceptions.
The implication of any is just massive. It means that a failure to meet the standard is sin, period. It doesn't matter if it was unintentional. It doesn't matter if you didn't know the standard. It doesn't matter if you only fell short by the tiniest amount. Any deviation, whether it's a lack of conformity or a transgression, is classified as sin. The standard is absolute.
All right, I know we've covered some very precise concepts. So in our final section, let's just do a quick review of the key takeaways to help solidify everything. So to quickly summarize, we learned that this classic definition comes from the Westminster Shorter Catechism. It has two parts: the passive failure to be, that's a want of conformity, and the active failure to do, that's a transgression. The measuring stick is the objective law of God, and that little word any makes the standard absolute and all-encompassing. Okay, now for a question to get you thinking. Based on what we've covered, how does this concept of the law of God as an objective standard differ from a typical human moral code? You know, the kind of thing that can change over time or between different cultures.
And a second one, and this really gets to the core of the whole thing, can a person be in a state of want of conformity without performing a specific outward action? Think back to our discussion about sin as an internal state.
And finally, let's end with a more provocative thought. If this is the standard for sin, absolute and comprehensive, covering our very nature, what does that suggest about the nature of human morality itself? It's a heavy question for sure, but it flows directly from the logic we've explored. Thanks for joining me to break it all down.